what this kind of brings up for me, because I think we've hit on sort of what makes, as a technique, what makes what makes teaching, or sorry, what makes doing heaven and earth and getting into opening and closing such a different kind of experience for most people. So I want to circle back around for a second and just talk about teaching this stuff. And Eric, if you take us back to Denver for a minute, I know for me, and I know at that instructor training in 2004, and most of the exposure I've had to learning actually how to open and close has been, it seems like it comes more from Bruce's Qigong Tuina background. Back in '82, and when you guys were doing this, were you learning it more in a martial arts context, or was the Tuina part of the teaching method at that point?
Well, my memory, and I don't know, he didn't let us take notes in class back then. And a lot of what notes I have, I used to write down afterwards. So
you're just trying to make up for lost time now.
Mind. I know, I'm catching up, but so I'd have to go back and it's been years since I've looked at the notes of what we did then, but I think that I think we must have. I mean, the effective way of teaching it is using what would appear to be what you're calling Qigong Tuina techniques. Is really just manipulating someone's body so that you're activating that particular joint to open and close, and to get the sense of separation in it, so someone can feel it. So it's really the way to learn it, and we must. I think that's some of what we must have done. I can't think of really doing it any other way, to tell you the truth, but it's a long time ago now. And then going back to that quality of mind, what does he call it, the pass-off? If somebody's pumping your joint and they slowly, let go, and all of a sudden you're supposed to do it yourself. That's really the next. The mind there is much more active, or has much more intent in terms of making the body do something initially. And there's always an interplay through all this stuff of sort of turning the mind off and just paying attention to what's happening, because all these things happen. This pulsation, as Cito said, it's a universal rhythm that's on stellar scale and molecular scale. The technique is to learn that. Somebody's really got to do it to you first, and that's why it is so unusual for people. It's one thing for people to start to get their mind into their body, but then to start to do something internally with their mind and their body, that's when they really start to, their eyes start to open up, and their level of awareness is new. And if you show somebody, as I have, I can open and close with, say, the joint in my wrist, that's an easy one, and you have them put their finger on your wrist and the little hollow there, and you don't move at all, and it opens and closes. The look on their face often is like, my God, what are you doing? That's what's so foreign, is that you're doing something inside. But those physical techniques that are like Qigong Tuina, or could be used as a Qigong Tuina technique, they are the way to help somebody learn how to feel any particular joint and get the process going and begin to understand it.
I'm glad you're talking about this, and Don is asking me a question on the side here about what the student experience is like actually going through that process. I'm going to share this with my students afterwards, and it's a big relief to me right now that you guys are all using the same kind of language, because they just think I'm crazy when I talk about opening and closing. I was like, come here, feel my shoulder, feel how that moves this way or that way, or whatever it is. It is such a foreign experience for people to learn how to move in this way. And maybe people can weigh in, but for me, so first, a couple things about how we teach this at Brookline Tai Chi so that people kind of get on board with it. There are two main entry points for people learning this stuff. For the most part, for sure. Most people come through our program and they do Tai Chi all the way through. And historically, we're going on about 20 years of data right now. Historically, with that flow, there was a certain point around maybe a year and a half or 2 years that there would be a major branch off where the people who started to get more interested in the internal principles of Tai Chi would jump into an energy gates class. So if you picture the majority of the people kind of flowing through our program, most of them came in seeing the Tai Chi form, seeing the external movements, and wanting to do a lot of that external choreography. So we take them through that process and slowly introduce Qigong principles over time. So there was a big jumping off point then to some pretty serious standing work. And once at that point they're on this path, again, depending how linear you want to be with it, they're on this path of going through energy gates and then heaven and earth and then kind of on into the other sets. A much smaller group is fanatical about standing from the very beginning. So they come in and they want to check out standing. They don't care about any of the choreography and they dive right into it. So we definitely see most people are their sort of experience is in line with what you guys are talking about, that it's so different that we don't even try to introduce this stuff from the beginning. And that, I feel like that's been a good way to finally kind of follow that progression and finally acclimate people so that by the time they get to a heaven and earth class, if we're doing opening and closing in the class, we're probably doing 40 minutes of pulsing. And in an hour class, we're doing a little bit of warm-up, we dive right into pulsing, and we do a short set of heaven and earth at the end. So there is a certain point once they've learned the basics of heaven and earth where that's all people come in for, is to get the joints opening and closing. And then we're able to do the hands, the arms, the feet, and eventually after 3 or 4 rounds of that, you get into the cavities. But I definitely think you're right. It's a small subset. So that's cool. Lucy's saying that, well, here, you want to go ahead and explain what you just said about a different approach?
Sure, yeah. No, what I was saying was that I kind of sometimes do the opening and closing the wrist joint exercise that one does, as a partner exercise when teaching it. Sometimes do that as a kind of party trick with friends who, when I'm trying to explain a little bit about what Qigong's about and explain some of the components of it. And even with people who've never done any Tai Chi or Qigong of any nature before, they obviously get it really quickly. And when I'm gradually, that point where you've got them to start moving the joint a little bit with them by themselves and a little bit with your encouragement. Yeah. And then you have that point where you gradually drop out of the exercise, and then the person who's learning how to do the pulsing suddenly takes over the exercise and the movement themselves. And they're usually just completely flabbergasted that this is happening to them. And I think sometimes it's quite a nice way to just do it and keep it really quite light and fun, because it's just like a party trick.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always have to give the warning to that to students at that point, that if they really get into that kind of thing, then they're well on their way to becoming Tai Chi and Qigong nerds, and they shouldn't tell anyone else about what they've learned or what they think is cool about Tai Chi class, because nobody's going to appreciate it. So, yeah, I think the wrist pulsing specifically is a great one to share with people.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out in terms of the efficacy of this exercise as just for simple health, that I once taught for about 3 years a class of mostly older women from their 50s into their 70s at home at one of the Council on Aging. And I tried to teach them the whole Tai Chi form. I'm not sure whether we ever even finished the damn thing, but we also did some different Qigong. And at one point, I started teaching them heaven and earth. And I don't think other than the external move, I don't think I ever did much more than getting them to focus on bending and stretching in the qua as sort of the center of the movement. I don't think we ever did trying to get them to open and close their joints or anything. But we did it enough that they could go home and practice the exercise. And sometime a month or two after that, one of them came up to me and said, Oh, I can't thank you enough. That exercise, I get up in the morning and I do 5 of them, and my neck, I have no arthritic pain in my neck for the rest of the day, and it's really helped with my golf game. It's like, okay, that's great, but to just, you know, to learn the movements themselves, even without much of the what we think of or like to think of, oh, it's so special because now I'm adding this internal component to it. You know, you really could teach this exercise to people who barely know nothing, and they're going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually had the opposite experience where I worked with a group of dancers once, and I didn't teach them any of the choreography at all. This is kind of along the lines of what Lucy was saying, that I just showed them how to pulse, and we were pulsing the ankles or something like that, and they were so into that. That's where the sort of exoticism of the movement, the way you're moving, to people who are really familiar with movement, that was a huge plus for them, because the idea of opening and closing was something that completely broadened their perspective on how to do movement in general. And so that was, it's interesting. There's a powerful tool to go either way. Yeah. Well, this is good. Anybody have anything else, heaven and earth related questions or recommendations or amazing insights? You've had students get several inches taller from doing heaven and earth. We've had that for energy gates for sure. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, hold on. Two quick questions. First, and I think these are both for you, Eric. Oh, we got a lot of questions. Excellent. All right, Sito, why don't you go first with that question?
Okay, am I up?
Yep.
I'm happy to defer to someone else because this might open a can of worms, and you're the moderator, so I'll let you just decide. But you and Eric both spoke on maybe 2 opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of how to teach and how much to teach and how strictly to adhere to the specific program that we were given during the teacher training. Eric talked about just doing some of the external forms, and you talked about just doing the pulsing. And I'm just curious, there's a lot of space in there in terms of how to break these components up and teach them.
Yeah.
And that might be the topic, but I'm curious as to people's thoughts on how to do that without losing some essence.
Yeah, and Don actually just sort of sent me a note about circling hands as well, and that was another key component of what we did in that 2004 training. So, Eric, do you want to take that one first?
Well, I think that it's a progression, and for instance, the class of the elderly ladies, I could only do so much with them, and they could do so much, and so, you know, I kept things simple with them, and that's not to say you couldn't do that with you know, younger people too. But I think that if I had, you know, an ongoing set of classes where I was working on this, I think I'd spend the first few weeks really on the physical basics of circling hands, to get the body to, you know, move in a unified fashion, to get the quad and the spine going right, and work on the 2 movements of heaven and earth, and then I would spend the time, you know, doing what Danny was talking about. It's great to learn all this pulsing, but you need a vehicle other than it being sort of an interesting thing. You need a vehicle to train it, and this is the perfect vehicle to train it, and to then go through and drill those things in so that you're, you know, let's say you're doing, so then you get to, okay, now we're going to do opening and closing the hands, and all right, now we're going to open and close the hands in circling hands. Now we're going to open and close the hands in the marriage of heaven and earth. Now we're going to do the feet, and eventually linking it all together, and then doing some of the same sort of training practice for the people. You know, if you could continue a class into these things of getting the qua or the dandian or different parts of the body to be the driver to charge or regulate the opening and closing. And and then eventually it's working on getting all of those things to work smoothly together, because in the beginning it's easier to get these joints in the hands to open and close because we use our hands all day long, but other parts of the body it's a little harder to get, and eventually you want to have all of this smooth out and begin to function as sort of part of one piece in a easily regulated basis method. So it's a progression, and I would always start with the external shapes and space, and slowly add these internal components to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and that's the kind of high level overview of what the developmental process is. But I think the thing that we see at Brookline Tai Chi is that there's a bit of, for us teaching this stuff, it's a bit of a numbers game too, where only a certain number of people are going to go all the way through the process that Eric's talking about. And so you kind of have to choose sort of which signposts along the road you're going to show people at different times. Like that dance group, I knew I was going to see them for 2 hours. So my thinking was, I'm not going to impress them very much by teaching them commencement or the opening move of the short form, or try to get through single whip. They could all hang with that, and that wouldn't have really changed how they understood what was going on in Tai Chi or Qigong. So that was a good example of a case where I thought that here's something they don't know about. And I mean, Bruce even said, sort of like when he came back from China, he said most of the people he saw teaching in the States weren't talking about the Qua and weren't talking about opening and closing. So from that point of view, there's a lot of room to kind of get stuff out like that. Don, for some of your classes, sorry, put you on the spot here. For some of your classes, you're teaching like at a college, or you're teaching a fixed curriculum like that, or a fixed time frame like that. How do you make some of these decisions Sito's asking about in terms of the scope of a curriculum that you'd share with a group?
Right. Yeah. I have been teaching for a few years groups of acupuncture oriental medicine students, as well as massage therapy students. So I think those are good examples of when it's, like you said with your dancers, it's a very specific audience. So you're trying to figure out what it is that will maybe be the best benefit for them at this point. So for example, with massage therapists, I didn't worry too much about the physical movements of any Qigong that I was teaching them, mm-hmm. but giving them, teaching them a little bit about the opening and closing, especially doing it to someone else, as in the Qigong Tuina. I figured that's something that, going out into the world as massage therapists would be a good tool for them to have, both for themselves as well as for their clients. With the acupuncture students, because they're going out into the world as, what in the West, at least what we consider to be the highest level professionals in Chinese medicine, I was much stricter about them learning the physical shell of any Qigong that I was teaching them.
I see.
Because they're going out, they're going out and representing this to the world in a certain way. So it was sort of a different focus with those different groups.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense here.
And then the other thing is that sort of thinking more about it in terms of teaching the public, one of the things that's kind of happening in the Tai Chi and Qigong world is there's quite a few systems out there that are calling themselves easy Tai Chi, or in some way even more simplified, which is something that, I mean, even people like Chen Menqing simplified their Tai Chi form, but it's even getting to the point where it's almost losing a lot of the qualities that makes it valuable sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking that something like teaching circling hands, or calling it Tai Chi 101 or something.
Right.
Might be a good way to get people doing something, giving them something that's really simple in terms of physical movement, but it still gives them some quality Qigong.